I wanted to get your guys' take on was the discovering Sasquatch through technology. Have you guys seen the Google Earth images that came out? The guy claims to have found Sasquatch on Google Earth.
I haven't seen that, no.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. I mean, since we have so many satellites out there, but it's whether it's a Bigfoot or not, it's up for debate. But it's a guy that it's funny. It's pretty sad we're getting blob squatches from satellite images. But I was thinking about like Google Earth, people using Google Earth to find Sasquatch. I was thinking about the Falcon Project, which here's my take on the Falcon Project, and you guys tell me what you think. I like the idea. I like the idea. It's not a bad idea in theory and on paper. The problem that I see with the Falcon Project, and I could be way off on this, it's going to be close to $500,000, I believe, by the time. I believe that's for 1 year. It's basically just to get video of a Sasquatch, which doesn't prove anything. Videos can be hoaxed, videos can be faked, and I was telling Woody, I think they're overthinking. People are overthinking technology too much and relying on technology too much to provide some sort of evidence. Again, I like the idea. It's thinking outside the box, but it seems like a lot of money and it seems like a lot of effort to get video evidence of Sasquatch. I realize the theory is to find them, to get video of them, and then basically to track the animal as it's going through the forest and pick up its habits. But I think it's just too much. It's too much money. I don't know. What's your guys' take on the Falcon Project?
Mine, I have a couple problems with it. I mean, years ago, a few of us thought about things kind of like that because there were a few occasions where pilots had seen tracks. One instance was like the Bluff Creek area before Patterson got his film. When there was snow up in that area, a doctor and a pilot was flying over that area, found tracks, followed the tracks with the plane, and then actually came across the Sasquatch. And that's fine and dandy, but logistically, well, the first problem I have is it really shows that they don't know where they're looking for something. It's kind of a shotgun approach. You know what I mean? They're just floating a balloon sort of all over the place, hoping to pick something up instead of, trying to figure out behavior patterns, their range areas, things like that I do, that we can really nail down where they're going to be within a 30-day time frame throughout a certain region. And as far as tracking, if you've got one with a balloon one day, the logistics are a nightmare trying to get a team into where that creature was. And by the time they do, either they're making so much noise when they get there they've scared it off, or it's already long gone. So, their hopes of tracking something, like in the past, is always kind of, you can track them for miles sometimes, like in the case in Skamania County. The sheriff over there tracked one for more than 5 miles until they lost the trail, and they were using dogs. So it's a nice idea, but it's not well thought out, I don't think.
Yeah, and I agree with you in a sense, and I also kind of disagree. Part of me says that you had made the comment that they don't really know where they're looking for Bigfoot, and part of me says that yes, they do. They do know where to launch the Falcon Project. I do think it's too much money, and I think with them looking in certain areas, I think they do know where to look, but I don't think that technology, myself, and you'll probably agree with me on part of this, I don't think you're going to go out there with, like the Falcon Project and nighttime cameras, stuff like that, in order to find them. I think you need to go out in a natural environment. I'm not saying that you need to go out there and, sit down and talk and play flute and that sort of things, but I don't think you're going to find them with the new technology of today. So
yeah,
I agree with you. I agree with you part of it, but I think that I disagree with the part that when you said that they don't really know where to go look. I think they do know where to go to look.
Well, you can go to areas where they are, but you know how it is. If you've got a balloon up in the air, that's a lot of area to cover. I mean, where do you point the camera?
Right. That's true. And with the amount of forest, even like here in the Pacific Northwest, and Will, you're familiar with this area and west yourself, there's a lot of undiscovered territory that man hasn't even been in. So
right.
I think maybe that's what you're kind of touching on, Will. Do you think, am I way off on that, or is that what you're kind of saying?
And there's certain things, I mean, unless you've got some kind of game experts or somebody who knows about, animal habits and what they're doing and why they're doing it and where they're doing it, I mean, you can tailor your search along those lines as opposed to just kind of floating around, in an area where Sasquatches have been seen, hoping to get something on film. And another good point you made was, just getting pictures or a film of one isn't going to prove they're out there. The Patterson film is still the best proof we have, and that's 45 years ago. And something Renee DeHenden and some of the old-timers used to tell me, you could have one picture, you could have 10 pictures or films, or you could have 100, and public sentiment's going to be the same. It's not the same as some form of physical proof.
Right. And I think you're kind of limited with a search like that, with the forest. A lot of the forest areas are so dense. I realize there's open areas that you could possibly track one from the air, but there's a lot of areas where you can't see 5 feet into the forest from the road,
Absolutely.
let alone from up above. I was looking at like Yakult Mountain, that whole area through Google Earth. It just looks like a big green blob is what it looks like. You can't see the forest floor. So I think you'd be kind of limited too in your search.
Yeah, and I can relate to when I was in the Army with an air cav unit at Fort Lewis. We'd fly around doing our reconnaissance work, which was what my job was as a reconnaissance specialist, looking for tanks and other armored vehicles, and under that heavy canopy, you can't see them.
Yeah.
I hate to butt in, but I also agree with you too, Wes, because do you remember here a couple of years ago when you and I went out hunting and we had that a little bit of a scare over in the Suisun area? And Will, you're probably familiar with that area too.
Yeah, yeah.
We would get, Wes, we get 10 feet into the woods there, and before you know it, you could get turned around. So I mean, it's I don't think people realize, unless you're actually from this area, how dense the forest is, because you can walk in 10 feet and not even know where you're at, and next thing you know, you're lost.
Yep, you're absolutely correct.
And that's why I think part of the Falcon Project isn't going to work in my eyes. I think it's a lot of money invested. I think it's a lot of money invested in the wrong ways. I don't know how to invest it in the right ways, but I don't think that's the right way to go about it.
Well, I think if I had the money to do a project like that, instead of doing that kind of a project, I would invest the money into actual manpower, because the area you guys live in, I worked that area for 12 years. That's 3,300 square miles from Mount St. Helens down to the Columbia River. It took me that long to really learn one particular group's pattern, how they would move throughout their range, by putting basically boots on the ground in that range, knowing what their behaviors were, what areas they'd be in during certain times of the year. I think we could locate the group, and then it would be a matter of tailoring the search down with either dogs or professional tracking techniques, things like that, to where we could get close enough to maybe get more evidence, photographs, films, biological materials, all that stuff, and then sort of deciding from that point where to go.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I was telling Woody that, like Roger Patterson, whether people believe the film or not is irrelevant. I mean, look what he had. He had 2 horses. He had his buddy who had a gun to back him up, and he had a camera, and they rode in. I honestly think that's how you're going to get them on film. I think that's the best way to, again, the Falcon Project is outside of the box thinking. I like outside of the box thinking, but, I don't know that they're going to get the results that they want besides a TV show. You know what I mean?
I think you could do a really spectacular job with very low-tech and low-cost methods.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you 100%. One of the things I was going to bring up with you guys is, you hear about Sasquatch crossing a road in front of a car all the time, that type of behavior. But did you guys hear about the Sasquatch sighting in Lander, Wyoming?
Not so much. I mean, I read a little bit about what you had. Why don't you tell us about it?
It's pretty funny. The Lander police officers were dispatched to Main Street, and based on the Sasquatch sighting. But what these anonymous callers were calling into 911 for. They were saying that a Sasquatch was out there chasing cars.
Oh.
And the guy was actually pretty frantic. He was calling in, and they had a few callers that called into 911 saying that this Sasquatch was out there chasing cars. But police officers went out to the area. They weren't able to find a Sasquatch or anyone dressed up in a suit or anything like that. Have you heard of that before, Will, where they chase cars?
You know, I have, and there's one incident that really kind of sticks in my mind. In fact, I put it on my blog about a week ago, and this story was back from 1952. It was a logger's account from the Bluff Creek area, as a matter of fact. In a nutshell, what happened with the story was there's a little town called Orleans that's not far from the mouth of Bluff Creek where it goes into the Klamath River. And it's even today, it's a little tiny place. He was supposed to take one of the cars and go up and pick up one of his other logging companions. They had a detour, and this was in the middle of the night, and he drove for miles, and he thought he saw something standing next to the road as he went by, but he dismissed it as, imagination. And then he looked in the mirror and thought he saw this, horrendous face looking at him, But again, he dismissed it, so on he drives, and then he sees this small tree laying in front of the road blocking his path. So he starts to get out of the car, and he hears this thudding of feet running up the road, and then it dawns on him he really did see something. And this creature actually, it would charge him and then back off and stalk up the road and come running back when it thought he was going to get in the car. Finally, he made the mad dash to the car. The creature tried to push the car off the road, and then he got out of there, didn't tell anybody, and the guy that he was supposed to pick up later, much later, told him or asked him if he saw anything strange up there because something tried to push their car off the road. So it's kind of a spooky account, but...
That's a creepy account.
It's creepy as hell.
Yeah, that's...
Well, you guys, as your encounter was in your car, and you were surrounded by a group.
Yeah.
And, had you guys stayed there longer, that could very well have devolved into something much hairier than it was.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And it was bad enough as it was.
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad enough as it was. That's true. So what's the deal? And I realize you're just taking a shot in the dark, and feel free to jump in. Why would they just screwing with people, or what's the deal?
A lot of people have a real misconception about Sasquatches, and I think partly it's due to the fact that I think there's two varieties of these creatures in the country. One's a true Sasquatch that we have here in the Northwest, and the other one is a little more like the Russian Almas. It's a little more human-like. It's essentially what the Minnesota Iceman was. The true Sasquatch, which is what we're talking about here, has a very short temper. They get ticked off very easily about things, and I have heard this many, many, many times from witnesses. Sometimes they just get ticked off and they will attack. Mountain gorillas do it. They also have kind of short fuses, and if you're someplace where they think you shouldn't be or doing something they think you shouldn't be, they'll attack you. So I think occasionally cars get attacked, people get attacked, and it's not hard to find these accounts.
Hey, Will, I was, this is kind of along the same lines, but not. What do you know about, I hate to put you on the spot here, but in 1927, there was a Dr. Ivanov that did an artificial insemination between sperms and apes in Russia. And that's, you mentioned Russia, and that kind of set me off on that. Did you know anything about that? And if you do, what do you think about it?
I've seen a little bit on it. The Russians in those days were pretty much open to trying all kinds of things because that was sort of the communist idea, was more towards science, less towards theology. So, aside from, their economic ideas and all that. But according to the stories, they tried it, but from what I've read, it wasn't successful. That's not to say that it couldn't possibly be done because, chimps and gorillas are between 96 and 98% same DNA as we are, so it's theoretically possible you'd get something like, I believe it's donkeys that are, bred from mules and horses.
Right.
But they're sterile. Anything that's a hybrid like that is sterile, so it always has to be bred from the two mixtures. So I guess in theory it's possible, but as far as it being what these creatures are, I don't believe it is, because these guys have been around for thousands and thousands of years. So, they preach the Indians coming to North America, for instance.
I think I saw a thing on that study too, Woody. Oh, gosh, probably like 5-6 years ago. I remember reading about that study. I think it did fail. I don't think it produced anything.
Well, no, according to, you guys are correct on that. According to the study, and the only reason why I know this is because I just read it the other day, but you guys are correct. It did fail. It was unsuccessful. But there is a certain amount of people or population that believe that it was successful. What they did is they actually cast the Bigfoot out and got rid of it out into the forest. Work with me here, but they casted Bigfoot out in the forest. It didn't work, and that's where we get Bigfoot today. But Will, what you said earlier is also true. If you go back thousands of years, there's drawings of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, what have you, in caves way back thousands of years ago. So it would have been prior to this. But
I've got quite a number of Native American friends, and they all tell me that these things were here when their people came to the continent, and they pushed them out of the hunting areas. So, there's plenty of evidence to show they've been around a long, long time.
I'm going to talk about this eyeshine encounter I was listening to about an hour ago and get your guys' take. But I wanted to ask, and I know Woody talked about it last week on our show, but about what evidence would you have to bring forth beyond a dead body to prove the existence of Sasquatch? And I think that both Woody and I said it would take a dead body, but Will, is there anything that you can think of, beyond a dead body that would prove the existence of Sasquatch, as far as the evidence that you could bring forth to the general public to get people to buy into it?
I think it's possible to do it with, a combination of materials like hair and all that stuff, but it has to be done differently than it's been done, like with Ketchum's thing and all these things out there right now where people are doing DNA stuff. One of the biggest problems that they've encountered with that, and the reason that, like with Ketchum's study, the reason it didn't pass peer review was because there was zero control over the collection of the hair samples. In other words, they come from all these different locations, and nobody knows. You get Joe Bob Hunter out someplace, he finds a hair in a tree and he sticks it in his pocket. Well, number one, they can't say for a fact what that hair came off from because they took it off a tree, not the animal. Hair degrades in weather very, very quickly, and I got that from an expert in Canada when I was writing my first book, Notes from the Field. So without that control, that hair could be anything. And if you pick it up with your hands and you stick it in your pocket, well, there's a couple different forms of contamination right there. So there's just a lot of problems with that. So it'd have to be done, with very strict control measures. And I don't think just taking off a tree limb is good enough. A lot of pictures, but there again, it would have to be National Geographic quality. You'd have to have a film of the thing, yawning and eating with its tongue sticking out at you and all these different things. So, if the quality were high enough and you had a nice combination, feces samples, hair samples, bedding, different types of behavioral things, territorial markings, you might be able to put together a pretty convincing picture, but you're still probably not going to get the scientific community behind that. It'd be really iffy. So then we're back to the body. And then it's the case of, well, do you go out and shoot one, or like I think I have a few spots located that might actually be burial sites. I never thought about it when I was there, but looking back on it and doing some more research over the years, I think I have a couple of places where we might actually be able to go to, and all that would be there now would be probably teeth and maybe some bone fragments, but if you had a single tooth, that would be enough. That's as good as a whole body, because there are many species that are represented by nothing more than a single tooth.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. The reason why I think it's going to take a dead body is more or less because of the stigma that's attached to Bigfoot and the community itself. And I realize I'm calling everyone out on it, but here's the problem with coming forth with pictures, hair, prints, and all this other stuff. The whole community is such a circus now to where, you got Melba Ketchum, Rick Dyer, not that I'm putting them in the same category, but it's like, it's just such this huge circus. And if it was, say, like a mountain gorilla that we were trying to prove is real, and we were trying to bring back photographs and evidence and footprints, if the mountain gorilla community was like the Bigfoot community, it would take a dead body in order to prove for everyone to buy into it.
Yeah, the mountain gorilla actually was in that category up until about 1907. And I believe, I want to say it was a dead body, the first one that was when it was actually proven, because the stories around the mountain gorilla were just like Bigfoot stories before one was actually brought in.
Yeah, if you read a lot of the encounters, you're right. They are a lot like Bigfoot stories.
So, like I said, I was trying to play, try to be the nice guy and say, okay, we could do it possibly with all this stuff. But when it comes down to it, and the original people in this subject, Dehinden, Green, Titmus, when I first met Green and Dehinden, their whole thing was to shoot one, to bring one down. And those guys were very smart men, much smarter than all the people involved today. And they had thought this out completely thoroughly at that time. In fact, the day I met John Green, he asked me if I owned a 12-gauge shotgun, and I said I did. And he said, well, here's what you do. If you see a Bigfoot again, he says, load it up with alternating double-out buckshot and slugs. He says the buckshot's for knockdown power, the slug is for killing power. And he says shoot it in the lower spine to slow it down or disable it. So, they were not opposed to it. They had to back off years after that because public sentiment was against them.
Yeah, I wonder if the public would be against it, though, if someone shot one, brought it in, and it was being studied by a university or by somebody who was studying it, and we were learning more about it. I wonder if the public would be so against that person who shot one.
I think in general they wouldn't be. And initially you'd hear, all the, the wailing and gnashing of teeth from, a certain sector. But I think the public at large probably say, well, it was going to happen sooner or later anyway. And now we can actually protect them. It would, of course, the Endangered Species Act would kick in, and all that would be, it'd all go into the scientific community at that point. So, Billy Bob with a shotgun wouldn't be able to go out and just hunt one down at will. In actuality, if everybody thinks about it, it's not a bad course of action. If they really want protection for the species, maybe that's what needs to be done.
Yeah. No, and I'm starting to lean more towards that way. I think you'd have to get a game plan together before you actually pulled the trigger. I think you'd have to have a backup plan and a backup plan and a backup plan, contingency plans, just for your own safety. But I think in the end it would be the best. What were you going to say? Well, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, I agree. I totally agree. And it's, it's again like Bob Gimlin told me one time. I asked him, I said, well, how come you guys didn't follow that Sasquatch? And he said, we were afraid of where the other two were, and the one we had on film was the smallest of the three. So they were scared of those things. It wasn't like they were just out there on a Sunday picnic ride. They were very afraid of those creatures, and they had good reason to be.
And I would agree. I would agree with you, both of you, and I've kind of changed my thought on that too. Before I was like, I realize it's probably going to take a dead body, no pro kill on that. I think you're right. It is going to take a specimen, and eventually it's going to happen. Will, what are your thoughts? And Wes, chime in on this too. What are your thoughts as far as if we do end up shooting one and capturing one? Who would you go to, and what would you do at that point? Would you just go to? Who would you go to? I think that's probably a question that a lot of people are asking.
Well, I tell you, the first thing I wouldn't do is any of the scientists who are involved in the Bigfoot community, I would not take it to. Mostly because I would want a completely neutral opinion on it. People who would handle it, who didn't have a vested interest in the subject. So I do have a couple thoughts on that. There's some anthropologists in the eastern part of the country that would be extremely good. So anyway, that would be my first thing. Of course, the first thing you'd have to do is get in someplace and freeze it, which is interesting. I don't know if you guys know about the Minnesota Iceman story, but when they didn't initially freeze that creature. Well, they froze it, but they didn't freeze it in water. And after they kept it in the freezer for a number of months and noticed that the skin was drying, which is what happens. The meat kind of turns into like jerky if it's just frozen. So they filled it in a tank of water, and that's how meat oftentimes is kept fresh. So, I mean, there's a lot of logistics that have to go into it. I mean, you have to really put a plan together if you actually had one. Number one, getting it out of the forest. You know, you get an animal that's 8 feet tall, 900 pounds. It's not like 2 or 3 guys are just going to hoist it up on a gurney, you know, and pack it out. That requires a lot of thinking. You'd almost have to sling load it out with a helicopter. So there's a lot to think about in that.
Yeah. I think I'd call Muskie Allen and have him as being like my PR guy. No, I'm just joking. You know, Rick Dyer had Muskie Allen as his PR guy.
Oh, I don't know really much about Dyer, so you know,
yeah,
he's kind of like
Days
really get involved with a lot of other Bigfoot hunters because I was friends with all the original pioneers of the subject. I kind of watched them and how they did things, and they really didn't get involved much with other Bigfoot hunters unless they were very serious and good at what they did.
You don't like the Days of Our Lives?
That sort of rubbed off on me.
You don't like the Bigfoot? You don't like the Bigfoot Days of Our Lives?
You know, I go on Facebook sometimes to look at some of the comments, and I get to like the second one, and I shut it off. I just can't deal with that drama that goes on.
Speaking of that, I got something for you guys, and you just made me think of it, Will. I belong to a bunch of these different Bigfoot groups. I'm getting so tired of seeing these. They'll show like a deadfall tree leaning against a healthy tree, and then you'll have the researcher or quote-unquote researcher explain that's a Bigfoot sign, that's the Bigfoot area. And growing up in the Northwest, it just looks like a tree that fell over on top of another tree.
Right.
Have you guys seen a lot of that?
Well, I've seen that since I was a little boy growing up, you know, out on the Puyallup River outside of Ording. But, you know, it's not, you know, I don't want to pop people's bubbles because I have a lot of friends out there and a lot of them on Facebook who, you know, have genuine interest in there, and they're out there trying. But, and you guys know from growing up in the Northwest what it's like. You know, you're out there, 99.9% of that stuff is natural. It's just, you know,
you're right.
Our human eyes look for structure. It's what our brains do. Our brains try to find structure in everything we look at. Happens oftentimes, and it's probably my fault personally. I knew when I put in my first book the territorial markings, the tree snaps, and the twists, that was going to cause a lot of this stuff. But I went ahead and did it anyway because I wanted my name on it first. You know,
right.
I was searching for this. Bob Titmus show, he's the one that taught me about this many years ago. And I think Titmus would have wet on himself had he seen what I found in the places he told me to look, because what he showed me was nowhere near as impressive as what I found. But, you know, trees just falling over and leaning against each other. And, you know, you look at some of the pictures, some of them look kind of complex, but I have to wonder, you know, there's a lot of jokesters out there, and I'm one of them. You know, I'll give you an example. My buddies and I would go out camping by Mount Rainier about once or twice a month. After the Blair Witch Project came out, you remember the little figures, stick figures they had hanging up in that movie?
Oh, yeah, I remember. Yep.
Take those and leave them in our campsite when we would, you know, pack up and leave. And laugh about it, always wondering, you know, what the next person was going to think was going on up there.
Yeah.
So, you know, I wonder how many people are out there making things like this for people who are genuinely out there looking for Sasquatch evidence, and they see this and jump to that conclusion that that's what it was.
And you see that a lot. You see people jumping to everything's Bigfoot. It must be Bigfoot. It must be. And it's like, really? I don't know. You know, and I've seen them, and I'm first to be skeptical and say, I don't know. That could be something else. And it's like those deadfall trees. It looked like a dead tree just fell over on a healthy tree to me. It doesn't really, I mean, did you guys see a Bigfoot do that? I guess I'm lost on why you think.
Well, my thinking is, an animal that's out there, and all animals are out there just surviving. Everything they do surrounds their day-to-day survival. So you have to ask yourself, when they do something, what benefit to that animal is that behavior? Trees up against each other, to me, that doesn't do anything. Sasquatch doesn't need shelter. They're probably survived very, very well during the Ice Age. In fact, more often than not, what I found is, for instance, if you find tracks in the snow, they're not coming down out of the snow. They're going up in elevation into the snow. They like that cold weather. Wet weather doesn't bother them. They don't sleep under shelter. They sleep out in the open. So why leaning a few trees together it doesn't serve any purpose. Now, the territorial markers I found, my Indian friends also told me that was exactly what they were, but it's a simple thing. They walk along, they either snap or ring a tree, depending on what the type of tree is and its properties. Like Doug fir snaps, it doesn't twist, and ponderosa pine twists, it doesn't snap. So I can understand that that's easy, it doesn't require a lot of energy, and it serves a purpose. But if you have to go through the energy expenditure of leaning all these trees up that weather could come along and knock over, I don't get it.
Yeah, and I agree with you too, Will. I think that, and Wes too, I think with the amount of times that, for instance, Wes and I, that we go out, the more experienced we become, you learn kind of certain things to not look for more than you do the things to look for. And you're not so quick to make a judgment call on, hey, this is a tree leaning over and this is a Bigfoot thing. I mean, there's more things out there to look for. And I think that just kind of comes with experience.
It does. And for me, it's like something has to really kind of grab my attention for me to pay a lot of attention to it. And that's from a lot of experience. So, if it doesn't slide me across the head, I'm probably not going to pay any attention to it.
And I agree with you. I mean, I think, after Wes and I had our experience, and I know, Will, you've had several experiences, there's things that you do look for, and certain things that you just kind of brush off as like, this is Mother Nature. One thing that kind of has me, and Will, I kind of know what your answer is going to be on this, but I'm going to ask it anyways, because there's a lot of people out there that I think probably think in the same way I do. When Wes and I had our encounter or our experience, I even today still question, is that what I saw? I don't expect everyone to believe my story because, again, it is a story. I don't have any documented proof that it actually happened. But do you believe that, or what are your thoughts on, I guess I should say, what are your thoughts on, is Bigfoot possibly, can it travel like an interdimensional type creature? Because the things that Wes and I saw that night, and kind of work with me here, the things that we saw didn't seem natural of this world. The way it moved, the way the second one moved, the way that the things were up in the tree and they were looking down on us. There was so much going on that was just it didn't seem part of this dimension. And I think there's a lot of questions out there from other viewers and along the same topic. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, for me, again, it goes back, and I, through the course of my research and talking to a lot of friends and a lot of people around the country, especially from different tribal groups, because they've been around so long and they were a part of nature. And what I've seen hasn't been anything out of the ordinary. I think what people a lot of times do, maybe something because it's out of their frame of reference. And of course, everybody has a different frame of reference, because that's based on our knowledge, things that we've picked up, not just in school, but, from day-to-day life and our experiences. So, our brain, when something comes in front of us, it has to make a decision based on what we have tucked away in there, on that knowledge and experience. So if we have nothing for that reference, then our brain scrambles to try to put something together to explain that. We don't like to go without having some kind of explanation of things. We had the same issue back when the first time we found Bigfoot tracks in 1972. My buddy Mark and I found there were dozens of tracks, 3 different individuals, and it just wigged us out because we had no idea. They look kind of like human tracks, big barefoot tracks in the snow, but we had never heard the word Bigfoot, never heard anything about this, so we're like, what the heck? It sort of short circuits your thinking. And then when we realized, of course, whatever made those tracks was still really close by, it scared the hell out of us, and we took off running. And I find this with a lot of people, especially witnesses. When I talk to them, it seems to be easier for them, especially in this, I don't want to go off topic a little bit, but talking to somebody that's actually had a similar experience to them helps them sort of incorporate that into their frame of reference. So then they're a little easier with it. It sort of calms them down a little bit, makes them a little more relaxed. But as far as interdimensional, no, I don't think so at all.
Yeah, I think it's okay. I think people need to realize it's okay that you don't know. You don't know what it is. I mean, it's okay not to. And I agree with you. I think a lot of people jump to the conclusion that they've never seen it before, and so it's an alien or it's a. And Woody and I have two completely different takes on what we saw. In my mind, I saw primates. I saw, even though it walks like a man and it was something outside of my reference, I have a hard time not thinking that it's some sort of primate, whether it's an ape, a chimp, some form of one of these, I don't know. But in my mind, it's like I just, and all the encounters you hear with their behavior for me, I see primate, but I can see how people jump to the conclusion, it's like I said before, I've heard people where they say, well, it just disappeared. And right. When Woody and I saw that large one, which was basically King Kong, drop to all fours and go down like a spider, I could see how they could drop like that, go off into the brush, and you would think, hey, King Kong just disappeared. And so you'd put that frame of reference, well, it must be interdimensional. It must have somehow entered another dimension and for me, that's almost more crazy thinking than thinking, well, maybe it dropped and took off. You know what I mean?
Yeah, here's the thought. Sometimes, depending on the person, it really depends on the individual person and how they react to situations that are that shocking. Because, you guys know as well as I do, when you encounter these things, it's a huge shock to your system. Our brains
it's like finding out the boogeyman's real.
Absolutely. And well put. When they think it just vanished, they may have blacked out for a few seconds, not realizing that happened, where their brain just couldn't handle. Our brains can only take a certain amount of stress, and they'll shut down. So that could be what it is, where they didn't realize that that's what happened, but for maybe a couple of moments, the creature was there, they were still seeing, or they thought they were seeing. Let's say, like with old film, if a film breaks, you splice it together, you don't know the film was broke. In their conscious state, their system was shot to the point where it was overloaded. It was like a breaker switch, shut off a few seconds, came back on. They didn't realize it, and in that time, the creature disappeared and took off in the brush.
It's funny that you say that, Will, because that is so true. I actually did a little research a few days ago on certain things on how the body reacts, and anytime the body and the brain works the same way, anytime the body is injured, for instance, let's say you pull something in your wrist or your arm, your brain automatically shuts off. You can no longer go 100% on that limb. Let's say you injure your arm. And that's the same way with, if you look at football players. I mean, a torn ACL, you can no longer go 100% even though you try. What I was reading was the same way that the brain reacts. Anytime the brain is put on stress mode, it actually shuts off. People usually go to sleep. That's one of the biggest things that among humans is what happens is anytime you're on overload, you want to go to sleep. And it's funny that you brought that up because I just read that like about 2 days ago. So that's really cool that you brought that up.
That was my major W with psychology. And one of the little tricks they taught us, the way to prove that to yourself about how that works. And I don't remember the terminology. It's been too many years. But like when you put your socks on in the morning, there's actually a very specific number of seconds that your brain registers that your feet feel the socks on your feet. But after that, you stop feeling it. And because if your brain were to register every sensory input all through the day, you'd be overloaded quickly. So it does shut off on certain levels. And even small things like clothing, it will shut off after a very short time.
Yeah, it's kind of a way of protecting, a way the body protects itself, I would imagine. The brain protects itself,
So when you get a Sasquatch encounter, that's again, depending on the person and how they take things, that's a huge shock.
I agree with you on there. I mean, being with my like OCD, I put my socks on backwards. It bugs me for about, I'm like, I'm late for work. Should I change my socks around? No, I go to work and then I forget all about it. So it's that type of thing,
yeah, you're not going to feel it anyway after a few minutes. So.
Yeah, you're not going to feel it after 10 minutes anyways. But I had another question, Will, that we got while we got you on the phone. I wanted to ask you. One of the things I did read the other day when Wes and I were doing some research was, what are your thoughts on Bigfoot living underground? Is that something that you believe in or not? Do they make like small shelters under the ground and live in them?
Personally, I don't. You know, in Skamania County, just east of you guys, that whole area, I mean, all the way to the Columbia River is honeycombed with lava tubes. There used to be an old-timer in Carson that showed me quite a few of them that he discovered. Some of them go miles underground, and we never found any evidence at all over there. And there were plenty of Sasquatch sightings in the areas where the lava tubes were, but it didn't look like they used them. And my opinion is they're a pretty spooky creature. You know, I mean, they can be aggressive, but for the most part, especially when it comes to human activity, they'll bug out. They'll go away. And I think with a lot of wild creatures, they won't be in an enclosed space to where they're trapped. If there's a predatory threat or whatever, they won't use that. We did find one time out of, 41 years in the field now, I found one time, and that was over near Wind River. We had a sighting where a logging crew was using a helicopter to pull logs out over there. The pilot saw a Sasquatch sneaking up. The loggers had put all their equipment, their lunches in one spot, and they were out working when the pilot was pulling a log up, and he happened to glance over, and he saw this thing kind of creeping up on their lunches, apparently trying to get his own lunch. And, he hollered down on the radio to the lead of the crew, and they chased it off. So we went to investigate that, and there was a rock outcropping that was maybe 5 feet high, and it went back about 20 feet, more shelf than anything. But it was, I hesitate to say cave, it wasn't really a cave, but there were tracks around there, and I did find a whole bunch of the floor was covered with fresh vegetation that had been picked almost like bedding. So it could have been a young one that might have been using that temporarily, but for the most part, I've never seen anything that leads me to believe they live underground in any sort of cave or shelter.
Yeah, I would imagine you want to get trapped in something like that. You wouldn't want to corner yourself into, like you were saying, Will, they're kind of, they get spooked, so I don't know. What were you going to say, Wood?
Well, I was going to say, Wes, and I think you know the answer to this. Maybe not, but I think you do. And I'm just asking this because there's people that aren't from around this area that might be wondering. Up there on Mount St. Helens, as far as the ape caves, why are they called the ape caves? Is that something to do with Bigfoot?
No, that was a group of Boy Scouts found or named that. And I don't remember what year it was. If it was I think it was in the 50s, late 40s, early 50s. Actually, there was a guy on a bulldozer working up there and almost backed into the hole. And then there was a group of Boy Scouts up there, and they named it the Ape Caves after the miners' incident at Ape Canyon in 1924.
Yeah, they named it after Ape Canyon.
Right.
The only other two things that I have for you guys is one topic is that the Brian Sykes, it looks like he rediscovered an ancient polar bear, not the Yeti. So I don't know if anyone else has anything to add to that, but good job, Brian Sykes. I don't know if anyone wants to.
Well, that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about data collection in the field. You go out and pull hair off something, you don't really know what you have. So, they were thinking it was Yeti. It wasn't Yeti. It was a bear. So, that's sort of, they were lucky enough to find out that it was a bear, because in most cases, from what I've learned from experts about hair, is that you pretty much have to already have a known sample to compare it to. Other than that, it's not really worth a whole lot. Screams are actually much more valuable than hair samples because tests can be run on recordings, and they can actually determine the volume of the lungs that made that sound, so you can tell how big the creature was.
Yeah, you can test the amplitude, and you can test it against other animals known animals too. What were you gonna say, Wood?
I was going to say I have one more thing too. Actually, I have a few more things, but one of the things I was going to say is if you go back and you do history, and this is open to both of you guys, whoever wants to answer it, the Sumerian tablets go back to 1800 BC. They call it a hairy wild man or a beast. It's a hairy wild man or beast with extra abilities. What do you guys know as far as how far back Bigfoot goes in history? When was it first kind of discovered? We're talking 1800 here. Does it go back even further than that?
Well, the oldest article I know of was around 1811. That was the oldest written article. The Spanish missionaries were collecting stories from Indians 300 years ago. You go back beyond that, when you start looking at other parts of the world, Europe, for instance, France and places like that, there was what they called the woodwose, and that was the hairy wild man. And that was such a popular figure, it adorned almost everything. Chairs, tables, door entries, signs, you name it, it was everywhere. So, and you can go back, in the Nordic countries, they were ogres, frost giants. I mean, the list goes on and on. Written records go, as far as there are written records, there is mention of the wild man in everything, everywhere. So it's not like it's been a secret. In fact, I've always said that once the Sasquatch is proven to be real, it'll be the reaffirmation of discovery. In other words, it's something that we haven't had to deal with for a long time, so we kind of forgot about it. But our ancestors knew about them very well, so this is sort of the rediscovery.
Yeah, I think they have rock art painting. I mean, I don't know if you consider that written record, but they have Sasquatch rock art that was painted by and I think it's in California. It was dated back, I want to say 500 AD. Gosh, I'd have to look it up now that I
remember
Big Mouth.
No, you're right, Wes. That went all the way back to like 500 AD, and that's when they actually showed paintings on the wall with Bigfoot, and it was actually, they called it Bigfoot because it was drawn, the way that they drew it on the caves was actually with really big feet. It had a cone-shaped head, and it kind of had a muscular build, but then the feet were overdrawn or accentuated, however you want to say it. They were really big, large feet, and I remember that. I remember what you're talking about there, Wes. I saw that actually on Ancient Aliens the other day.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
so I think it goes
around.
back.
I mean, there's as long as people have been making, any kind of reference, whether it's in writing or artwork or any sort of communication, to future generations, there's been mention of them.
Well, I was just going to say, with the history of Bigfoot, and maybe you have some topics too, Will, that you want to discuss, but with the history of Bigfoot, the Bigfoot of way back in the history, we talk all the way back to 500 AD, 1800 BC. Do you think that it's, as a creature, it is evolving? Do you think it's changed? Do we have the same creature today that we did back thousands of years ago, or is it something completely different?
I think it's pretty much the same thing. The only difference now would be because there's so many more people there, and there's always been sort of a friction between humans and the Sasquatch. So that's one of the reasons they're so hard to catch up with, is because they don't particularly like us. They probably, and let's say, if we drug one in tomorrow, 10 years from now, scientists would be saying they view humans as predators, because humans have always been a pack hunter. That's the most successful hunting strategy that's ever been devised by nature, is pack hunters. Doesn't matter how big an animal is, like a grizzly bear, you get a pack of wolves, they can take a grizzly down. And true same with the Sasquatch, they're completely adapted to their environment, whereas, humans, we're kind of small and frail by comparison, but humans are vicious. We're probably one of the most vicious species that have ever come onto the planet. And, it's not just our intelligence, we have that, but our viciousness as well. It always cracks me up when I see these shows put on, that are scientific type shows, and they portray early humans as sort of the victim and, being timid and having to, huddle together. You look at our history, we've gone out and killed everything. We do it for sport. Just, it's a right of manhood in a lot of primitive cultures. So human beings are vicious. And if it's a challenge, there's always some, youngsters with a lot of testosterone that are going to go out there and try to give it their best against the biggest and baddest creature they can find. So to me, that's the main reason we have such a hard time catching up with these things.
Do you think their elusiveness is a survival method to hide from humans, or do you think it's something that they've developed along the lines of hunting, or do you think it's more or less to get away from humans, like you said, because we are vicious, we are ferocious, we are, humans, like you said, we are pack hunters?
I think it's a combination. I think, number one, they're a top predator. They are the apex predator in the forest. I mean, they have to be able to survive, and they have to be as big as they are to be able to move as quickly as they do. They have to cover a lot of ground, so they're an expert hunter. They can move silently if they want to. They move very quickly, and that also serves them to keep away from they view as dangerous, which is us. So between those two things, I really think that's the crux of why they're so elusive.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you on that. I think that they are elusive, and that's been proven. You hear so many people talking about we were following the tracks and all of a sudden they disappear. I don't know how quite to explain that, and I don't claim to be an expert, but some of the things they do, man, really makes me think twice about what type of creature they are. I don't know. It still boggles my mind, even though I've seen them. I still don't know what to think about them.
I think they're definitely something not to be messed with lightly.
No, I would agree. I would agree with you on that. Not to be messed with lightly, and I'm not going to have dinner with one anytime soon. But
my friend Carlo in
Portland
and he was a sociologist, and we used to talk about he'd like to tag along with me when I go Bigfoot hunting out in Skamania County, and he'd always say, well, maybe we should carry, sweet potatoes or apples or something in our pockets, and maybe if, we encounter one, we get in a submissive posture and hold this thing out in our hands, and I'm thinking, yeah, it's going to use me as human toilet paper if I get in that position. So
yeah.
I was in agreement with him, but I kind of went along with what he was saying sometimes, but he did see one, but not in the same in-your-face experience that I had, and my encounter was not, they were not happy when they saw me standing there, so, I wasn't going to hold a sweet potato out, and, in Yakult, when we were there in 89, there was a primate specialist that came out there, and he created a bunch of problems, and I won't name him by name, but he's not one of my favorite people. He changed the routine, and something I learned in anthropology was if you're going to observe a species, you don't interfere with what they're doing. You stay back, you try to stay out of the picture, and you observe. Well, they were taking, the family would put radishes out every night for the horse, so the horse wouldn't touch them. Sasquatches apparently liked them, and they would come every night and take these big piles of radishes. And he decided to put donuts and turnips, turnips and some other things out there. They threw everything around. They took a huge bite out of one of the turnips, threw it on the ground, took the box of donuts, box and all, and then went down and raided the neighbor's garden, scared them so bad they moved out of the house and left permanently. So, they kind of have a short temper when it comes to messing with their routines.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'll take a picture of one at like 100, maybe 200 yards. I'm not going to get in a submissive position. They rip elk apart. They rip elk apart. I don't think I need to hand them a potato.
Yeah, I don't think I'd want to present myself with a boxed lunch to one.
I got one for you guys. I got one last for you, and then sorry to interrupt you there. What do you? This is kind of like, this is out of the box thinking again, and this is kind of way out there. What do you think? Who was here first? Was it Sasquatch or was it humans? And also, second part of the question is who is going to outlast who? Do you think humans will destroy themselves before Sasquatch disappears, or do you think Sasquatch will run its ground and disappear for humans? The only reason why I asked that is because there was I was reading a thread it was like on a Facebook page the other day, and I thought it was a pretty good question. What do you guys think?
I say we wipe the Sasquatch out and then ourselves. Will?
So as far as who was here first, they've been around a lot longer. It's interesting that upright walking primates have been around 7.5 million years. And 10 million years ago, the term was, I've heard people call it, was truly Planet of the Apes at that time, because there were 50 different species of primate living on the planet over the entire planet at that time. The upright walkers like we are, we like to think we're the only ones that were special because we walk bipedally. But that's a common trait among primates for 7.5 million years. So we're just the last one in the chain that's come along so far. And I think, if we keep going the way we are, we might wipe ourselves out. But these guys, as long as they have their open spaces and food supplies and everything, they're going to continue to be around.
I say them and then us.
Yeah. Little Sasquatch barbecue.
Yeah. Let's wipe them out first and then wipe ourselves out.
That might be a tough task, though.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, we were talking about eyeshine at one point, and I don't know, there's a lot of debate. There has been for many years about whether the Sasquatch has eye shine or not. I remember years ago talking to John Green. I asked him about it. I said, well, what is there to this? Do they really have this or not? And he says, well, at that time he had about 3,000 witness reports in his files. And he said, out of that, I've got about 7 reports where people claim that there was eye shine, and a couple of them were red. He says, personally, I don't think they have it. But I've seen things, and many people have. Well, first of all, I don't think a lot of people understand what eye shine means, what that is. And it's basically there's a structure it's mostly nocturnal animals that operate mostly at night. And what that does is when the ambient light comes into their eyes, it prevents the light from bouncing back out immediately like it does in our eyes. It sort of makes the light particles bounce back and forth so that those nerve receptors can take a little longer to create the picture of what's outside what the eye is looking at. And our night vision sights work exactly the same. They work on that same principle. So the light particles are allowed to bounce around in there a little longer and make that image so you can actually see with the light that's in the air. And actually, we have that in our eyes too, but it doesn't function. But it doesn't mean, and other primates do, so the Sasquatch certainly could, and very likely does, because they operate mostly, now they can operate equally well during daylight hours versus nighttime, but it's mostly the nighttime that they're out there, and I think it's largely due to hunting activity. So they very likely, they have to be able to see in the dark to be able to operate like that. So they probably, based on what I've seen and other people have seen many times, do have that eye shine.
See, so Woody and I didn't see any eye shine at all, and that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but we didn't see any eye shine. The part where I get lost, and I understand what you're saying about eye shine and especially nocturnal animals, you see the reflection of the light coming in, and I believe it makes it to where it's almost they use that light to basically see at night. But the part where I get lost at, Will, and I was listening to this encounter earlier, and Woody, jump in if you on this. I think I was talking to you a little bit about it. But this guy had claimed to have seen the Sasquatch, and the way he described the eye shine really wasn't what we would say as eye shine, basically. What he was describing was almost like the eyes were powered by like a battery, and he would see, and it was red, and they were glowing red. This was actually during the day that he saw this. But I hear a lot of people talking about that to where it's like, and I know when animals get scared, their eyes will dilate. You can see it in cats. Cats do it all the time. But when an animal is scared, their eyes will dilate. But what is your guys' take on this? And I don't even know if I want to call it eye shine, the eye glowing that people talk about, the big glowing red eyes. It seems like it's more prevalent on the East Coast than it is over here. But what is your guys' take on that?
Boy, I don't know. That one's, I don't know what to make of that. I don't think, first of all, a Sasquatch isn't going to have that. What I've seen and many credible people that I've talked to have seen is more of an amber color, light amber. And red is typically animals that are like rodents and birds and possums. There's certain colors go with different animal species. So if they're seeing something, especially if it's an internally, powered light source, I don't know what that could possibly be. I don't know if there's anything in biology that, other than that, fish in deep depths of the ocean that can do that, because of luminescence in their body. But as far as mammals, I don't think that's possible.
See, and I agree with that. I can't think that would be possible. The way he described it was like sitting in a movie theater, and you look up and you see the exit signs, the red exit signs. That's how he described the eye shine. And I can't think of any animal that does that. That would be. What do you think, Wood?
Well, I don't know, and I kind of get lost too on that a little bit because you hear different instances of the red eye shine, and then Will, you brought up the amber eye shine, and really Wes, you and I, we saw no eye shine. It was a clear moonlit night. There was a lot of light available. Maybe that's why we didn't see it. But it's like, I have dogs, and with dogs you see kind of like a yellow eye shine along with cats. I don't know if I don't understand the difference between the yellow and the red or the amber. You hear so many different stories. I don't know what to think other than, it's kind of like it could be a mechanism that they use for hunting. I don't really know, but what really gets me is you hear different instances about the different colors. I don't know if it means it's a different type of Sasquatch or exactly what that means, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know for sure. I don't know enough about it.
Well, when you saw the eye shine, was it kind of like what you would see in a mountain lion at night or like a deer? Is that what you mean by
very similar. In fact, well, now you just had the moonlight to go with, right?
Yeah, we
that's correct.
Yeah,
you weren't shining your light.
No.
That's why you didn't see the eye shine. If you take it has to be a brighter source like a flashlight or something like that. That's when you're going to get the eye shine, because it's
kind of like a deer in the headlights type thing, maybe, like when a deer stops in the headlights. Yeah,
right.
We didn't shine any light on it. All we had was moonlight to go off of.
Well, that's why you didn't see eye shine, and in that setting you won't, because it's not quite enough light, and their eyes are probably their pupils and everything are adjusted to that light setting. But as far as an animal, now here's a thought on and this kind of goes to people's their frame of reference again. I think if we went back and looked at stories, let's say 30 years ago, eyewitness accounts, and if you look back, and I always hit the history thing because there's so much to learn from it, because legitimate stories, when I hear somebody telling me their account, I can tell within seconds if it's a real story or if it's BS, because I know so much of the history and there's the patterns and what's real, what's not. So as time, let's go back to 1965 forward. As you move forward and look at the reports, there's things have changed over the years. And I think because there's so much of this information out there, all this conflicting information, people who may have a proclivity to be interested in the subject, maybe they say they're skeptical, they don't believe it, but inside they're kind of interested. I think there's certain expectations that if they did see something, they might fill in the blanks with things that they've heard or read someplace. And maybe those are artifacts, that their brain has put in these stories that really weren't there. Maybe, the shock to their system when they saw this creature, again, they didn't know how to sort of fill in the blanks, so their brain starts putting pieces of information, pulling it out of stores on this stuff that's been floating around out there. I mean, maybe that's what it is. I don't know. But there certainly isn't any internal light source for any mammal species.
No, I would tend to agree with you. Well, I think there's after doing so many interviews that Wes and I have done, I think there's a lot of people that believe they've seen something or they have seen something, and then they kind of go in and fill in the blanks. And that's kind of when you call a little bit of BS on certain things. I'm probably hanging myself here, but when Wes and I had our encounter, we had several interviews shortly after our encounter. We contacted some individuals. They spoke to us separately. We said we would take a lie detector test. They asked us questions. And time again, they would ask us the same questions over and over. Were your headlights on? No, they weren't. A few minutes later, well, were your headlights on at this time? No, they weren't. And so, we saw what we saw, and we weren't making anything up. It is what it is. And I understand what you're saying about people kind of throwing things in there to kind of justify maybe what they saw. And that's when you can kind of tell when a story is true, in my opinion, is you don't have an answer to everything,
And that's another good point you brought up, too, about interviewers. A lot of people jump into the subject and don't really know what they're doing. And that's, not a good thing or a bad thing either way. It's just a fact. But if an interviewer doesn't ask open-ended questions, they can unknowingly put information into the interviewee's mind,
right,
and that can become part of the story.
That's what I was trying to say, but you said it better.
You're right. And I think it's become so difficult. And I've been working on this thing for my book, Creek Devil. One of the chapters I'm calling Other Wild Men, because there may very well be two different types. And, it's probably weeks people out thinking that, having a giant hair-covered monster running around is bad enough. Now we might have two types. But in Australia, they have two types. And in other parts of the world, there are two types. So it's not out issue. And I think when some of these things, again, those expectations, somebody sees something, they label it all under Bigfoot. Okay, is it Bigfoot or is it this species or that species? What are the particulars? How much artificial stuff is put into these accounts that really wasn't there? It's a lot more difficult today than it used to be to try to make some sense of these encounters.
You guys don't believe people who have 24 encounters and have them living in their backyard in the tree?
I think they're absolutely full of crap. One time,
people they have an encounter every time they go out.
Yeah.
Renee used that if somebody had more than 2 or 3 sightings, they had a brain disease.
Yeah. Well, he sees that a lot too.
A while back here, and I won't mention his name, but and this is when I did an interview with Joe Rogan a few months back. We were discussing all this stuff, and he thought I was probably the most legitimate person he talked to, and he was really trying to get me to raise money to go out and be able to do a real serious hunt for the Sasquatch. And he threw out the figure several times in our conversation of $10 million. So I went ahead and put up a site to try to raise money. Everybody was very supportive except 2 guys, and I sort of blew them up because they were kooks, but one of them come on there, and I don't know if they were just jealous that I was actually trying to raise money or what, but one of them claimed that he had 100 sightings and over 1,000 pictures. And I unfriended him very quickly because he was a nut. But he's one of these guys that pushes these blob squatch pictures. I mean, if it's not a clear picture, it's worthless. It might be interesting if you've got a form there, but I've had people who they genuinely try to help with enhancing pictures. And I can send you a couple of copies of things people have sent me. They've done a wonderful job with their pictures, but they've made things in there that weren't there. One is a face, one's a whole body, and it's nowhere near what I wanted enhanced. And I appreciate their efforts, but, and it's, again, there's people out there doing it now. M.K. Davis is one of those people, I think. Maybe he means well, but, for instance, he claims that there was a massacre at Bluff Creek, after Patterson got his film. And he bases it on 3 things. He got a picture from Mrs. Patterson, with a little more, the famous frame where the Sasquatch turns and looks at Patterson and Gimlin. And there's a little bit more foreground in the picture. Well, in the foreground in the sand, it looks like a dog footprint. He claims it's a bloody footprint. Well, the first piece of evidence he claims there was a muzzle flash or camera flash. And it looks like just a white spot in the film processing. And then, of course, the bloody dog track. And the third one was this dugout pit that's supposed to be full of blood. Well, the dog footprint, I looked at that, and the first thing I thought was, well, where are all the other dog footprints? And if it's bloody, how come there aren't all kinds of bloody dog footprints in there? And how come sand didn't fill them in? And in the pool, you can clearly see it's running water because there are reflections off the ripples. People want to, they want to see what they want to see in pictures that aren't there.
Yeah, it's like a fish story. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger the farther, It's kind of like he just kind of ran with it. And, I mean, I'm with you on that one. I thought the same thing when I saw some of the stuff that he was coming up with. I thought, you know what, you're kind of getting a little bit off track here, kind of retelling the story of Bluff Creek, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, and Bob Gimlin is probably one of the most honest guys on the planet, and I've talked to him a number of times, and he told me, things that I haven't heard other places, like, we talked about how much he saw the creature's tongue, he could see its teeth, he saw its eye move, the color of the hair was lighter than what the film shows, there was, and on and on and on, so, it wasn't like, and of course these guys try to spin little things, he says, well, it might have been a hoax. Well, I talk to him, he tells me these details, and he says, well, it could have been, but it wasn't.
Yeah. When they shot that 16 millimeter camera, when people see it now, it looks like the creature was farther away than it was, but it was actually pretty close. I mean, Bob Gimlin
said it was 60 feet from him.
Yeah, I mean, but if you look at the film, it looks like it's probably 75 to 100 yards out.
Well, those old
maybe
films, it was. Everything looked so much farther away. when you film something. And people today don't understand that. That's how photography used to be. It used to be, and they had those little lenses on them, and all of that adds into the effect that you get with that. But yeah, they were actually very close.
I saw an interview with Bob Gimlin. It was like 2 days ago, and he actually said at one point while they were shooting the Patty film that he believed that he was within 25 feet.
Yeah,
that's pretty close. That's pretty close.
He was closer than Patterson. Yeah, and he told me he was scared for his life the whole time.
Yeah, I think when he said he crossed the river, he was like 25 feet. When he rode across the river behind him.
They were always afraid that creature was going to turn on him and charge him. And that's not out of the question because I interviewed a guy out in the Columbia River Gorge out near the Bridge of the Gods who had one charge him. And that's not the only story I know about that. They will charge just like a gorilla, a mock charge.
Let me ask you this, Will, and Wes, maybe your input on it too. You're familiar, and I hate to keep going back to, I always say this on every show, I hate to keep going back to Wes and I's encounter, but you're very diverse in different occurrences or encounters around the United States, around the world. What is your opinion on the type of Sasquatch that Wes and I ran into? And I ask you that because I know you know a lot about the area of where it happened, almost right down, the GPS of where it happened. You know exactly about the group of individual Sasquatches that we ran into. What type of Sasquatch do you think we ran into? Were they going to have us for dinner? I mean, were they the violent type, or are there different types of Sasquatches?
Well, not different types, but the behaviors are different, and it really depends on, I think, there's just like humans, every animal has a little bit of a different psychological makeup, if you will. It depends on how well they've eaten lately, moods. I mean, these guys are kind of moody anyway, but that group was aggressive. That's the same group that we investigated back in 89, 90, just a short distance from where you guys had your encounter. And they weren't, I wouldn't say they were aggressive back then, but they were very bold. They were not afraid of people. Many, many encounters during that 9 months.
You remember the screaming, Woody? Remember the one that came out?
Mm-hmm.
We thought it screamed. We never really told anyone that on our encounter. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I told you, Will, this, because we couldn't really make out what it was.
Mm-hmm.
We really couldn't make out what it was. We were driving on the way up there, and we both had our windows down. And
oh, that's right, yeah.
And it was out of the corner of my eye, looking off to the driver's side. It almost kind of looked like a person. It was like a silhouette. So I mean, I really couldn't make out what it was. But as we drove past it, something like screamed at us, and and Woody stopped the car, and we turned around, but there was not. I mean, you couldn't see into the foliage of whatever it was, and we both kind of looked at each other like, what was that? What, because we had no reference to it. The amplitude that it screamed was louder than a human. It wasn't a bear, so it kind of threw us off. I mean, we were already almost on our way up to the mountain. We were basically almost up to the mountain, but something had stepped out and screamed, and we both didn't really have a reference to what it was. And so going back to the behavior, where they're chasing cars, it just kind of threw me off. And we never really have told anyone that portion of the story because we didn't really see what it was, and we didn't really, I mean, what do you say? You saw something scream at you, but it was more or less kind of a silhouette, but it caught my eye because it was movement. It was a kind of a black silhouette that stepped out, and it screamed as we drove by. And so I think it is more of an aggressive, like Will was saying, I think they have a bad temper. I think it doesn't take much to make them upset.
Yeah, you can go back and look at lots of accounts, and there's lots and lots of them that just are, they're like that. Things seem to tick them off very quickly, and they are aggressive. They can be very aggressive, especially towards people, and sometimes animals.
You guys, I have kind of a theory, and kind of get your opinion on it. And this might be way out there, but I'm going to ask it anyways.
They're not aliens.
No.
Well, I know.
Go ahead, Wood.
Ouch. No, I wasn't going to say alien, Wes. I was going to say, do you think and this is kind of way out there again, like I said, but do you think that Sasquatch/Bigfoot only reveal themselves to certain people or people with a certain mindset? Because you hear of so many people going out there that are looking for Bigfoot, they never find it, and they go their whole lives and never see him, they never see Bigfoot or run into really any sort of evidence. But Wes and I have been out a couple times, and we've been out several times. I kind of think that maybe they only reveal themselves to certain people. And do you understand what I'm trying to say? I'm not sure where I'm kind of going with that, but I don't think it's just anybody. I don't think it's just the average human. They're going to go out and reveal themselves. Do you guys get what I'm trying to say?
I don't think generally they reveal themselves to anybody. They're just kind of, a lot of those encounters are chance encounters, unless it's an aggressive encounter, like in your case. They were challenging you guys. And sometimes it depends with people. I think it depends on their attitude, how observant they are, what they're doing, and if they're in an area where Sasquatches are. Now, a lot of people, Renee used to tell me, he'd say, we knew where the Sasquatch was, then they weren't evenly distributed. They were in certain places. So, if somebody can go out and spend their whole lives looking, but if they're not looking where they are, they're not going to see one. Or, maybe they're just not very observant.
I think maybe if you're looking for them, you won't see them, is my opinion on it. If you're not looking for them, you have that chance where you're going to run into them. I think if you're trying to force it, you'll never see them. I don't know. Yeah,
I'm not sure. I've got friends who try different approaches, and that's okay. I mean, they can try that, with the mental communication or whatever. But I've always
telepathy.
Yeah, I've always been kind of a nuts and bolts researcher. I either see something or I don't. It's either there or it isn't. And if it is, then there's something we can find. It's not, I'm not looking for God in the woods. It's not metaphysical. It's, there either is an animal there or there isn't. So
I think where Woody was going with it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Woody, but kind of like, I guess what I was thinking when you were asking that question was, when you walk down the street, if you see 5 gang members, you're probably going to go to the other side of the street. You're going to try and avoid it. If you see a child, you might walk past it. So if they perceive you as a threat, I think like Will says, I think you have to know where to look. And I think if you know where to look, you'll find them. But I think a lot of people go out and a lot of people see things that aren't there. And I think a lot of people who never see anything don't know where to look. And so a lot of it might be dumb luck, like chance encounters, unless you know where to look. Is that what you were thinking?
Like with the gang member thing, one of the things we always do, and seems to be pretty successful, if we hear one in the area, scream or whatever, or years ago when one night we had a group of them around a camp all night, we would just pretend they weren't there, kind of ignore the situation. And that would seem to draw them in more, like they'd make them more curious, almost like, well, don't you know I'm here? And they'd get a little bolder. And there are other accounts like that where, hunters or whoever would kind of ignore what was going on. Each successive day that they were camped, the creatures would actually come in closer. So I guess if they didn't feel threatened, they might come in closer.
And yeah, Wes, that was exactly what I was trying to say. You and I went out and we weren't specifically that night trying to find Bigfoot. So you pretty much nailed it, yeah, on what I was trying to say.
No, the only other thing that I have for you guys is, if you guys were to have a show like Finding Bigfoot, not exactly like Finding Bigfoot, but like a TV show, what would the format be, and what would you guys do to show proof, show evidence to the public? I mean, what things would you do to, I guess, attract the public and show proof to the public? But get your take on it, Will and Wood.
Well, I actually have a pretty solid idea of what I would do. Currently, I've got about 15 different ranges I've identified between the Canadian border and here in Northern California. So I would choose, well, first of all, I'd pick a team of people who mostly had encountered Sasquatches. I wouldn't take a team out that was inexperienced, because when you look at people who've had experiences like we have, we talk very differently about the subject than people who haven't had. And like the show Finding Bigfoot, none of those guys have actually seen a Sasquatch, so their behavior is totally different than, say, the three of us would be in the field. I would bring, a big game expert, and I've got a good friend who is from the Sioux Nation, who is a heck of a good tracker, and he used to be part of my field team. So that would be my team. And what we would do was take a look at these different ranges and hit those ranges based on where the Sasquatches are going to be. And I know how the movements are in some of these different ranges, different times of the year. And as we get closer to where the creatures are going to be, then we'd have to decide, okay, how are we going to approach this? Are we going to put cameras up? Are we going after film footage or biological materials, or are we going to go, say, look for burial sites? And with a show like that, I know a lot of people all over the continent. And there are some good pieces of information being found out there by some newer people. I would probably, for audience interest, I would augment some of that material with what we were doing in the field. And then, of course, our approach would be very serious. We wouldn't be out, banging on trees and screaming and using disco lights and what I think is just general silliness. Anybody who hunts knows that you're going to drive every kind of wildlife within earshot running for the hills if you go out and make the slightest bit of noise. I don't know if you guys hunt, but, sometimes even a deer will hear the slight click of you taking the safety off, and that's enough to make them run for the hills. So, the Sasquatch is a pretty sharp creature, so we would have to approach it, I think, from a hunting standpoint.
Yeah.
And I think the audience would love that. It would be so different than what's currently out there.
Wes, how do I follow up after hearing that answer from Will?
Yeah, no,
how do I match that, brother?
No,
good ideas. we come up with different things, and make a winning formula there.
And I think Will hit it right on the head. I think you would imagine the audience that you would get doing something like that, to where it's serious. It's something to where, Finding Bigfoot's getting old. It's the same old crap, and they never get any evidence or any proof. And I think Will's approach, I think it would draw a huge audience. I think a lot of people, if you could show proper ways to, even simple things like documenting, one of the things that Will always said to me was document, but show a process on how you actually go through and research and track and look for these creatures. Imagine if like Finding Bigfoot got a small portion of like the Patterson film or something like that. The show would explode. And I think that you could get something like that with Will's approach. I don't think you're going to get that, like you said, banging on trees. It's funny you mentioned the clicking the safety off, Will. That's actually happened to Woody and I when we were hunting.
Right. Everybody that hunts knows that. The slightest metallic noise will drive an animal away because they know that's danger. They know that's a human.
Right.
No, I was going to say, there was a couple things that you both said that really stuck out of my mind. Will, for one, I think it's very important to pick your team members correctly. You get the right team together. I think that is probably the most important thing. Two, also, Will, that you said is the silliness. The silliness would have to go away. The Finding Bigfoot, it makes for good entertainment, but if you're going to get right down and you kind of set the nuts and bolts, it's not going to work. Wes, you also said document, and you got that from Will, but that's true. You're going to have to document it. I think that Will's approach is the correct way to go. I'm not real big on Will. You said, banging trees and with all these night vision cameras. Not that you wouldn't use them, but I think there's something to be said for a different approach, and I think it would be somewhat successful. And imagine if it was. You'd have to have kind of a serious side to it, and not so much of an entertainment side.
With the National Geographic, say, seriousness approach to it. And another element, I would add, I have a good friend who's a skeptic. I'd bring a skeptic on the team, to provide balance. And also showing not just Bigfoot information, but educate the audience on, we find bear sign, we find cougar sign, to show them the distinction between, that we know, not only that we know what we're looking for, but what other animal sign looks like. I think a lot of people confuse things, or they're not really sure what, what's what out there. And I think if we showed them that, and credibility would have to be above board. So everything we do, when we look at evidence, for instance, we rule everything, Bigfoot is the last thing on the list. We go through the list and look at every other possibility first. If there's nothing else, then we can say, well, maybe it is Bigfoot. We can't really come right out and say it is, unless we find, tracks or something like that. But
well, and I think that's where you get the skeptical side. You almost wouldn't even need a skeptic, because I would say I'm kind of that way. Woody's that way. You're that way, Will. To where you see something, you're like, well, you know what? It might be this. It might be. And I don't think out of the three of us, any of us are so quick to jump in and go, well, that's a Bigfoot. A Bigfoot did that.
Right, and that's between somebody who's had an encounter versus someone who hasn't. Because all we have ever talked to that's actually seen a Sasquatch will be the most ardent skeptic. And those who haven't will jump to conclusions.
Yeah, you're right.
I think you nailed it there too, Will. It's if you have a team of people that went out that have had an encounter, it's more than likely that and you already said it, but Bigfoot's going to be last on the list as far as what it may be. You're going to rule everything out. So, I think some of us that have had an encounter are probably the hardest skeptics out there. To be honest.
Absolutely, and that's how you really define somebody who's actually seen one versus somebody who maybe is making up a story.
And that's our show for tonight. Hope everyone enjoyed the show. We will see everyone next week.